Welcome back. In this lecture, we are going to talk about another useful features of CSS, that is pseudo-elements. We already talked about pseudo-classes earlier, and now we are going to learn about pseudo-elements, which are a really nice CSS feature that you will see quite often in real-world projects. So, let's start by understanding exactly what pseudo-elements are. Pseudo-elements are essentially elements that does not actually exist in our HTML, but that we can still select and style using CSS. For example, we can select the first letter of some text, first line of some text, or content before an element, or content after an element. And then we can style these parts just like we would style normal elements. Start with a very simple example. So that's nothing but the first letter. So consider this heading. In our case, the first character happens to be an emoji, and we want to style the emoji differently from the rest of the heading. For example, maybe it's currently italic because of the heading itself is italic, but we don't want the emoji to be italic, so we can use h1 and the first letter. And in that, I'm selling font style be normal. So if I refresh this, as you can see, that changes to normal. And notice something very important here. The pseudo elements uses two columns, as you can see here. This means we are selecting the letter of h1 and we need some little bit space to the right. So I'm giving margin top to be 5 pixels. Okay. And the first character is no longer italic and we have some additional space between it and the text. The first letter works with other elements too. And of course, it isn't limited to h1. We can use it with other elements as well. For example, if we want to make the first letter of our h2 much bigger, so I'm selecting the h2, giving colon and giving the first letter be something, the font size will be 80 pixels. So if I refresh, as you can see, the T letter got bigger. So again, we are styling something that does not actually exist as a separate element in our HTML. CSS is essentially creating this pseudo element for us. So now let's look at another pseudo element. So I'm just commenting this out. Or suppose if I select all the paragraphs and giving the first line. For that, for the first line, the color would be red. So as you can see, every first line actually of the paragraph becomes red. Okay. And notice that we does not have to create a separate element around the first line. CSS automatically knows that what the first line is based on the available width. And this is actually pretty interesting because if we resize the browser window, the amount of text that fits on the first line changes. But CSS will still automatically style whatever the current first line is. And we can also select two selectors in a similar way. And we can also select two selectors. That is nothing but if I want the h3 plus the paragraph. After h3, it selects only the paragraphs of the first line and it becomes the red. remaining all will become normal. Now let's go to the most important and most commonly used pseudo elements, that is before and after. These allows us to create pseudo elements before or after the content of another element, and this is especially useful for some decorative elements. For example, let's say we want to add a small label, something like, as you can see, there is a label here, so we want to style that. So I'm just commenting this out. So we don't really need a real HTML element for something this simple. Instead, we use an pseudo element. Uh, let's just say we want that here actually after the h2 element. So I'm giving h2 colon colon and after, and I'm giving the content top. So if I refresh this, as you can see, now CSS automatically create this pseudo element for us. There's one extremely important thing to remember here. When using before or after, the content priority is required. Even if we don't actually want to display any text, we still need to specify the content. Without the content property, the pseudo elements generally won't appear. Now let's make our top label look little better. First, give it a background color. I'm giving the background color black, or you can use the hash code FFE70E, or you can simply use yellow, but work with hash codes. Now let's give the font size of 16 pixels, and also I'm making it bold. That is nothing but font weight. There's one important thing we need to understand. By default, pseudo element is an inline element, and if we want to use padding and the box model in a more predictable way, we can turn it into an inline block element. So I'm just saying display it as inline block. Now we can add some padding, 5 pixels top and bottom, and 10 pixels for the left and right. Okay. Now our label looks better, but we have another problem. It's currently sitting inside the heading's normal content. We want it to appear slightly outside the top right corner of the heading. And for that, we can use something we learned in the previous lecture, that is absolute positioning. First, we need to make the parent element relatively positioned. For that, I'm creating another h2 and giving the parent element position relative. This tells the browser that the h2 should act as positioning reference. Now we can absolutely position our pseudo element. I'm giving the position as absolute. Okay. So, for example, if I take the background color as orange, as you can see, we want this to be appearing here. So I'm just testing that, giving the top as 0 and left also 0. Okay, we want it slightly outside the top right corner. So I'm giving here right. Okay. Now it is top right corner, but we want to move it outside the element. And this is where negative values becomes useful. For example, if I give 25 pixels, as you can see, it moves 25 pixels from the right side. But if I give a negative 25 pixels, it moves to the right side at minus 25 degrees. It moves to the right side of minus 25 pixels. So we can do the same thing with the top also. I'm giving minus 15 pixels. Okay. Now the label moves slightly above the heading. So we ended up with something like this. And I'm just removing the color. Good. As you can see, it's much similar. And also I'm giving the color for the text. And with that, we finished another important part of CSS fundamentals. In the next few lectures, we are going to focus on some useful developer skills that will help you as your continued journey in the web development.